only on NTV.
Holes through my heart, then I patch them up. These holes in the curtains, holes in my heart, then I paint them black. Now they won't let the light in. See, I get lost in translation, in between the lines no one can read. I broke myself in the places I didn't ever think one could be. And maybe someday I'll be enough, not for anyone other than me. Oh, maybe one day I'll be enough for someone and not someone. Holes in the silence, holes in the chaos. How should I fix them up when I see holes in my wisdom, holes in my knowledge? How do I see the way when my eyes just don't open? See, I get lost in translation, in between the lines no one can read. I break myself in the places I didn't ever think one could be. And maybe someday I'll be enough, not for anyone other than me. Oh, maybe one day I'll be enough for someone and that someone is me. I still get lost in translation, in between the lines no one can read. And I still break myself in the places I didn't ever think one could be. And maybe someday I'll be enough, not for anyone other than me. Oh, maybe one day I'll be enough.
There's Njoki Karu bringing us to music therapy. Now, let's start the show where we should. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in every 100 deaths worldwide is by suicide. In Kenya, 4 people die daily by their own hand. These numbers are jarring and call the country's attention to the state of its mental health. Tonight, with all due respect, we yet again delve into this complex subject as we hope to raise awareness and normalize discussions around mental health care to reduce stigma. With us tonight is Dr. Lukoye Atwoli, Professor of Psychiatry, Venus Kyengo, counseling psychologist, Karibu Sana, and Loise Machiira, founder TZ Talks and mental health advocate. Of course, throughout we'll have Njoki Karu introducing to us music therapy. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you very much. Let's start where we should. And just to the question of just where we are. Just tonight, the mental health bill has been passed in the Senate. So let me just get the views around the table. First, if that's a good thing at all, if it's going to solve all our problems, all right? And we should cancel this show because all the problems have been solved. Prof, let's start with you.
It's a good thing that the country is talking about mental health. It's a good thing that the executive is pushing bills to Parliament on mental health. It's a good thing that Parliament is discussing mental health and passing bills, because this demonstrates a concern about what's happening. As to whether it's an absolutely good thing, obviously not. All our problems are not legal. Legal is just one problem.
They've never been legal.
No, I mean, we often throw the hammer of law against our problems, some of which are social, that we should solve socially, some of which are about funding, which we should solve by increasing funding, some of which are about stigma and attitudes. So the law is one prong in the solutions that we are looking for. It's a good prong, it's an important prong, it's not the only prong. I hope the president signs it into law, and I hope it is implemented so that we can start making strides in the mental health field in this country.
Well, that's just good. The lawyer in the room, lawyers always say everything is a legal problem and we must solve it, you know. So this law specifically, if we're to educate, you know, everyone else, what exactly is it supposed to solve?
So the mental health amendment bill, which I'm very happy to hear has been passed in the Senate, is actually supposed to empower people with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities to actually have legal capacity. So whereas Dr. might think that it's not an issue of law, it's actually it's solving a very big problem, because currently the Mental Health Act does not empower people with mental disabilities, and so a lot of decision making is taken away from them. So what the Mental Health Amendment Bill is doing is actually introducing legal capacity, where you're actually going to have somebody who's helping you make decisions through a supportive decision making agreement. And whereas that form is actually not in the Act, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights has actually created a form which will actually be used to kind of like complement the new rights that are being implemented. So it is a good thing, but I have to agree with Doc here, because you know, we pass all these very progressive laws, but the issue is always implementation.
We don't do anything.
We don't implement. When you look at even the status of, you know, mental health facilities in Kenya, it's very devastating, you know, and I just hope that the law will not be there as a, you know, as a show, but it will actually be implemented to the community level.
I want to talk about around that, I mean, as we go on the program, but Venus, as you, as a practitioner, how do you see sort of the gaps that are there currently? Obviously, it's not easy for fast acceptability of mental health and mental illness is one of the things that we don't deal too well. So this being passed, and from where you sit as a practitioner, why would you say we are bridging the gap?
Let me first just address what Dr. said about implementation. I think that's where the problem is. And I think in 2019, towards the end of 2019, there was a committee that was set up. I think Dr. Njenga was, you know, heading it. And some of the recommendations that were made were included declaring mental health as an emergency. Until now, we have not seen that. So as he says, I mean, you know, implementing is where the problem is. And currently, from where I sit as a practitioner, some of the challenges that I'm facing is people not being able to access the facilities and being able to pay.
Yeah.
I've had to, you know, stop charging so that I can go into the slums and deal with people who need those, you know, mental services. And case in point is, I think the lowest charging counselor charges 1,000 shillings.
Yeah.
Now look at someone who has no income, and yet they need the facility because mental issues are non-discriminative.
Right.
So they come to you and they tell you, I need these services, and you're like, you know, you have to pay. And maybe a couple of days later, they commit suicide. Their blood is on your head because you went for the money. You did not look at the illnesses, you know. So I feel that the government really needs to do a lot in terms of implementation, where we need funding, you know. They need to actually, you know, I just realized that we have only 100 psychiatrists in Kenya, just about that figure.
Yeah.
So we have issues that we need to deal with. Yes.
Let's just come to you, and you're recently, I think, is it 2 weeks ago, you know, talk about decriminalizing, yes, you know, suicide. Yeah. An important thing that first, a huge sector of society doesn't even know that it exists. Could you just educate us a bit?
Yeah, Section 226 of the Penal Code, Cap 63 of the laws of Kenya, says that a person who tries to kill themselves has committed an offense in law that can attract, you know, a penalty of up to 2 years in jail or a fine. Yet we know that almost everyone who thinks of killing themselves is doing so because of severe social or psychological distress. I do not know that jail is the appropriate avenue to address an individual's distress that is so severe that they are contemplating ending their own life. I think there's absolutely no controversy that if a person comes to you and tells you, I am in significant social and psychological distress, I need help, you will think about looking for help rather than calling the nearest cop and sending him to jail.
Right.
And the law says that you should, call the cop, take him before a judge and jail them, which is totally ridiculous. It's a product of very old thinking, pre-colonial, pre-independence thinking from our colonial masters who already removed that from their statute books. It's a relic of just how poorly we view people with mental health problems in this country. It's a relic of how uncivilized we are, because civilization is measured by how you treat the least advantaged in your community. And people with mental illness are completely marginalized. They're kept on the edges of society. And then on top of that, when they develop suicidal ideation, try to kill themselves, we want to punish them even more. Even if we don't actually jail them, the threat of jail hangs over their head throughout their care-seeking process. When they come to hospital, if they go to a government hospital, if somebody knows that law, they're thinking at the back of their head, maybe these guys might send me to the cops.
Right.
And so on and so forth. So I think removing it from our statute books is a huge step. Symbolically, meaning that we have moved from the barbaric days where we thought that people who try to kill themselves should be jailed, and even more importantly, by starting to enable people with serious psychological or social distress to seek help and to get help. It will be a statement by this country that we are no longer marginalizing people who are unwell, but we are actually starting the process of creating a care system for them so that we are a healthier, happier society as a result of it.
Right, right. Yeah. Loise, are we closer to what Doctor is talking about? Because as it is currently, the question of suicide first is, even the language itself is very harsh and hard, right? A huge section of society still considers mental health as some sort of, sorcery, something that happens to those people at the edge of society. It's not something that any of us, my sister, my brother, myself, have to deal with at some point. Are we closer?
I think we're closer by, first of all, having this conversation and having a lot of forums addressing the importance of decriminalizing suicide. One of the things Dr. has said is the fact that our current laws are borrowed from our colonial masters. And actually, England decriminalized suicide in 1956. Yep. So then in 2021, why should it still be a discussion? You know what I mean? We all know that it's a constitution. You actually have the right to the highest attainable standard of health in the Constitution, and health pertains to not just physical, but also social and mental as well.
Right.
And so then if you have the right to the highest attainable standard of health as a constitutional right, then why is it that we criminalize people who are at a breaking point? Because by the time you actually get into a place where you want to take your own life, it's a last resort. And the importance, I feel, we should be putting a lot of emphasis on how to improve our mental health before you get to the point of intervention.
Right, right.
And actually, we're all part of key stakeholders in terms of addressing this issue. Also, the media as well. The Mental Health Task Force report actually said that media have a huge responsibility in actually advocating for mental health. So what are the steps we can actually take to take care of ourselves on a day-to-day basis? What are we eating? Nutritional psychiatry is actually a new area of, this kind of area of medicine that's actually looking at the relationship between what we eat and how that actually improves our mental health. So if you're somebody who drinks too much coffee every day, what's that doing to your anxiety levels? What kind of content are you consuming? And these daily habits that we can take up on a day-to-day level actually can prevent us from getting to that breaking point. When the counselor talks about the cost of counseling, it's a serious issue. If on average counseling costs 1,000 shillings, if you look at an area like Kariobangi, rent ranges from 800 shillings to 3,000 shillings. So are you paying for counseling or are you paying rent? And so the question of priority becomes very important. Are you maintaining your livelihood or are you taking care of your mental health? So we can easily see how society and the government and our laws and priorities in terms of funding have actually contributed to the place where people are actually easily taking their lives. And unfortunately, we saw in Nyeri that there were a lot of high suicide rates. And they said that somewhere in a police station that they've now put up posters of counseling services. So the same police officers who are supposed to be arresting you for committing suicide are the same people who are supposed to be giving you counseling services. There's a huge disconnect in how we address this mental health issue, and it really boils down to how serious are we taking it. Because we'll pass all the laws we want in Parliament, in the Senate. We'll hope that the President will assent this into law, but we really have to think about how important we take it.
All right, how important we take this conversation. I want to take a short break, but when I come back, I want my panel to help us to, at the very least, practical steps that you can take from where we are for us to all improve faster wellness. And if you're in problems, if you're the stresses and things like that that are bothering you, what can you do today to sort of start moving to the right direction? You're watching With All Due Respect. Taking a short break.
Subscribe to Nyota for more than 1 month. Enjoy na channels Sita Zaidi. Subscribe to Basic Bouquet for more than 1 month and enjoy 5 extra channels. Subscribe to Classic Bouquet for only $899 for 30 days.
Enjoy digital life.
Shopping guide. Set a budget. Don't shop when you're tired, hungry, lonely, bored, or upset.
Glovo. You order, we deliver in minutes.
Get unlimited free deliveries for food, groceries, and Glovo party orders. Subscribe to Glovo Prime for only 300 shillings per month. Terms and conditions apply.
Game Ibambe with the ABSA Assist, the official banking partner of EPL in Africa. Stand a chance to win 1 million Kenya shillings monthly grand prize by depositing into your personal or business account. 10 lucky winners will get to double their deposit of up to 100,000 Kenya shillings. The more you deposit, the higher your chances of winning. That's Africanacity. That's ABSA.
Mama yao, angalia mkono yangu umeparara. Ala, aibu gani mwenzangu? Kwani umekuwa ukitumia sabuni gani ya unga? Unahitaji sabuni na laini kwa mikono. Unaona Ariel mpya inayeyuka haraka na ni laini kwa mikono yako huku ikiondoa madoa sugu. Na mikono yangu laini na safi.
Customer preferences are changing daily. You wake up one day, an innovation has come up and the customer wants a service in a way that you've not delivered before. Textbook Center aims to provide service, products and solutions that exceed our customers' expectations. Partnering with Sendi Transport ensures that we are able to deliver on our promise of being more than a bookshop.
You make is the bride.
Data hadi 500 MB free kila siku.
Your baby is quite active. After I discovered Morphix, I rediscovered my baby. She's jumping and running around. Well, we call that the Morphix Comfort.
Thanks to its elastic side bands, Morphix provides freedom of movement for your baby.
All babies deserve a high-quality diaper.
You should also try Morphix.
Intestinal worms are a major public health problem affecting children in Kenya. If the worms are left untreated, they can lead to anemia, malnourishment, impaired physical and mental development. Join us this Wednesday, 15th September on Your World Show and catch a comprehensive discussion on National School-Based Deworming Program with our panelists. Dr. Christine Wambugu, Head of Division, Adolescents and School Health, Ministry of Health. Madam Nerea Olik, Director, Primary Education, Ministry of Education, Jeremiah Ongwara, County Public Health Officer, Kisumu County. Live at 8 a.m. on NTV.
A place in your heart.
Hey, let me go! I can find my way out!
The next time you attempt to get near any member of my family, you'll regret it.
Mom, we need to know if he is on our side or on Audrey's. And that's going to determine my next move.
How is my husband going to go back to normal if we don't tell him that what he remembers is all wrong?
His defense mechanism will cause him to resist all the information you're giving. As a consequence, his memory won't come back. A place in your heart.
Ngarisha na Optiven at the Garden of Joy by Optiven. Deposit 995,000 Kenya shillings and get a free washing machine for your home. Call us today.
Inspiring possibilities.
Welcome back. You're watching With All Due Respect. Now, just before I took a break, we were discussing the questions of what you can do personally, today, practically, if you're in trouble and problems. And let me start with Venus. The question I'm seeing also that is online, happening on Twitter, is like, we don't know where to get help. It's not a thing in this society to get help. And part of the problem is because we are not used to finding help and admitting that you're in problems, and especially if you're a man, right? Walk me through just, some of the cases that, come to you, but most importantly, if today, people who are watching, if someone is in problem, what is the first step? What are the most practical things that we can do?
Okay, so let me just say that it's easy to get help so long as you know where to go. We have various counseling centers. We have individuals who practice counseling, like myself. But I know, like for me, one of my starting points, before you become a counselor, you also have to walk through that journey. You have to really, deal with your internal issues, and resolve trauma and all that. And Amani Counseling Center is one of those centers that we have known for long to pre-exist and has been able to help people. But back to your question, I really kind of like blame our culture for the kind of mindset we have and the kind of belief systems that we carry around. Case in point is some of the things we are told is, being vulnerable is a sign of weakness. I think, crying out for help is actually a sign of strength. It's a sign of strength, because why do we break down? It's because of the complexities of life. As it is, and with the current situation of COVID, we are all overwhelmed. Some of us lost our jobs. Some of us just being confined to those four walls of our houses brought in a lot of issues in our relationships, and people ended up divorcing. And there's a lot of hurt. And particularly, let me go back to our environment, which is an injustice, both internal and external. How were you brought up? Because some of these issues actually shape you as a person. You realize, and I remember when we were just having a discussion with Dr. and he said, part of the things, like personally, I remember, is we used to be beaten up, as children, because that was a way of, you go by the Bible, spare the rod and spoil the child, Now, we do this, with the best intentions, but ideally, as he put it, this child will grow up and start beating someone, because that's the only way they know how to solve issues. And part of the reasons why a lot of us are breaking down is because our parents, our communities, our social spaces never taught us to allow ourselves to cry for help. As men, we're being told men were being told, you just, don't cry. You're a man, you're supposed to be strong for your family. And that is not right. And statistically, more men commit suicide as compared to women.
Yeah.
Why? Because they hit the roof. All right. So the first point at any, at the point of admission is to get to know about the history of an individual. It does tell a lot. There's something we call the genogram, and it gives us a lot of insight about your history. Case in point, if you're from a family that has drug issues, most likely you're going to be predisposed to the same. If you come from a family that has cases of suicide, I wouldn't be shocked if you come in with the same issue. So knowing yourself, what we call self-awareness, is very, very important. Yes.
All right. Doc, is it, straight question, is it okay to beat up children, you know, so that they can be straight? And there's no other way to solve this problem but straighten them up with beatings?
It's never okay for a huge person to pick on a small person and use violence against them. It's never okay, especially children. So children's minds are still developing. Children's brains are still developing. There are very many creative ways of getting children to learn and getting children to behave in certain ways without violence. The only thing violence does is that it makes this person, if there's a behavior somebody is engaging in and you beat them up, what it does is they'll stop doing that behavior for as long as you're there and as long as you can beat them up. The moment you're not there and you can't beat them up, they will default back to their normal, which might be the exact opposite of what you're trying to prevent. But in addition to that, you have taught them an invaluable life lesson, that anybody who's weaker than you must bend to your will. So when this person grows up and is in a position of power, authority, he will make everybody who's below them to bend to their will by force, including using violence. I think I don't want to name a country that you know where the people in power default to violence whenever their wills are thwarted. But I'm sure you all know that country, and you all know the kinds of leaders that country has. Yes. And if you go back and talk to the people they hang out with and the people they deal with, many people normalize that violence because they went through the same violence. And there's a Kenyan saying that, you know, I went through all that, but I turned out all right. I think my message today is, if you think it's all right to beat up kids whom you disagree with, if you think it's okay to force people to do your will without trying to convince them by using violence, you didn't turn out all right. It's really that simple. People who turned out all right know themselves very well. They understand the environment, and they have created an equilibrium with the environment where they know sometimes they'll get their will, sometimes they will not. And when they don't, they have certain adaptive methods of trying to convince those in the environment to do things for them in a way that is more socially acceptable than using violence. Those people turned out all right. But those people who come with rungus at you and tell you must not sit here, you must sit here, they didn't turn out all right. Because they could have come to you and said, excuse me, there's a reason why you shouldn't sit here, you should sit here. And you would have listened, you would have understood, and you would have moved. But somebody comes at you with a rungu and says, you shouldn't do this, otherwise I'm going to clobber you. That person didn't turn out all right. Yeah, but I have a follow-up question. This is a general societal sort of setting. People who are grown up, beaten, went to 844 system where teachers were beating you. You went into a system where even neighbors would beat you. Everyone was beating up people. Yeah, it was fair game to be beaten everywhere. So these are the parents today, right? They don't know any better. Yes, now they do, because we're here talking about it. Right. There's a concept of adverse childhood experiences. Yes. Science is showing that children with a higher load of adverse childhood experiences are at higher risk of multiple problems, including mental problems, but also physical problems, including diabetes, hypertension, cancer, all sorts of other problems because of the adverse childhood experiences that they went through. So it does affect you physically, mentally, and socially, how you interact with people around you. So we continue meting out violence. That is the future we are creating for this country. We should never be surprised. I think looking back in our history, pivotal moments of our history, we try to solve problems by violence. Invariably, we fail. And somebody has to come in and talk us down like toddlers and get us, hey, separate, do things a little differently. We can do things differently. Within this country, there are enclaves, there are people who do things differently. And they thrive. Yeah. Within this same country, there are neighborhoods where violence is frowned upon. And the children there thrive. And they do well. We have examples. We stopped beating kids officially in schools. The Ministry of Education banned corporal punishment in schools. Yeah. Okay? So teachers had to become creative. Teachers had to find other ways of getting children to behave. There is still corporal punishment in parts of this country. But on the whole, it is frowned upon even by the teaching fraternity. So things can change. Parents can change how they parent their children. And there are parenting, classes. There are places people can be introduced to different ways of disciplining children. Because discipline is not just beating up people. Yeah. Discipline is having people have self-control and have people do things that they intended to do, things that they know the consequences of. And parents can be taught how to teach children these things. On the default is we should be teaching our children as they grow up those alternative ways of conflict resolution. For those adults who are already at a place where it is difficult for them to learn, we should have social sanctions for them. So that if you beat up somebody, if you beat up a child, there should be a punishment for you as an adult, because that is a deterrent.
Right.
And if you do that over time, you eliminate the violent environment that the children grow up in, and you introduce promise into the future of this country.
It's a good thing to look for the promise. I'm looking at the national record statistics that was released last week, and the major stresses, and young people majorly are the ones in big problems in terms of mental health, drug use, over-drug use, alcohol abuse and that sort of thing. Talk to me around this big problem, and especially with the pandemic in mind, and what happened in last year, that interrupted a lot of social growth, economic advancement or, career growth, and what that has done, to sort of young people and what you're seeing now.
So just to kind of also agree with Professor here, we're actually a society that's very traumatized. If you think about being colonized, if you think about the 1982 coup, if you think about the 2007, 2008 post-election violence, if you think about the previous elections, I feel like we live in a state of fear of the unknown, and politics does affect our mental state. Because as Kenyans, we're so obsessed with politics, we find that we do move with the tension that politics gives us. And so with young people who come from households where their parents have not been able to address this trauma, and this is why I say mental health and mental illness are two different things.
Yeah.
Mental health is, how are you able to relate with people around you? How are you able to relate with yourself? Are you able to actually unlock your potential without having the support from exterior factors? And so you find that people are being raised in households where there's a lot of trauma, and so you carry that with you. As Venus was saying, men are told to man up, and so you're not in a position to speak up. And unfortunately, we do have a lot of young people, well, we're predominantly on social media, and so the kind of content we consume also does affect how we see ourselves. Some content creators in Kenya misuse their social media platforms to tell men that they're not allowed to speak up about their emotions. And that's very responsible because, as you rightly said, we have men having the highest number of suicide cases. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at the number of people who, first of all, young people are the ones who are majority in Kenya. Young people are predominantly unemployed. Young people are predominantly on social media. And so what conversations are we having with each other? What I think would really help in terms of improving the mental health of a lot of young people is also working with content creators in the mental health space to shed light on places like Amani Center, which I'm hearing now for the first time, and I'm so happy to come across that. And literally by having these conversations, highlighting places where you can actually get support is so important, because just with the pandemic, at the beginning we knew that, putting down the spread of COVID, there were signs everywhere, billboards saying "Komesha Corona, Komesha Corona." Well, we can do the same for mental health and steps you can take to actually improve your mental health. And so it's, again, it's back to how important are we making this, because at the end of the day, it's really your responsibility to look out for yourself. And if as society we keep talking about mental health and mental illness in the same conversation, we lose out, because those are two different things. When we talk about illness, then you need intervention. You need something beyond what your friends or your family around you can give you. When we talk about the rights of persons with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities, that's a different conversation from somebody who's just had a rough day and they're trying to seek justice. So really it's an issue of priority, and I really hope that as we're having this discussion and the audience is watching as well, even employers who are watching this conversation can also just be able to create a safe space for the employees to be able to just speak out about any issues they have and make it normal. Like, we do really need to normalize talking about our feelings, because it is a sign of strength, and it's the only way as a collective we'll be able to really move forward.
The question is just to frame a little bit the continuum of mental health, where you would be, so many people conflate mental health with mental illness, and in fact many people have difficulty with the language. The key thing is mental health is the same way as saying physical health. Okay? Absolutely. So there's a continuum. From a person who's perfectly healthy, completely, fully healthy, at peace with themselves, at peace with the environment, achieving their full potential. And on the other end of that spectrum, there's somebody who's not like that. Yeah. So that person is unwell mentally. Right. Majority of the people are somewhere in the middle. Majority of the people in our society are somewhere in the middle. So somewhere in the middle means you might be closer on this end of being healthy, but then you've had a rough day. You have lost a friend and you're grieving. And that's affecting you psychologically, but you're not mentally ill.
Yeah.
Okay, you are still dealing with challenges of day-to-day life. It tips over when these challenges start affecting your social and occupational functioning. It tips over when these, prevent you from doing the things that you would actually be doing on a day-to-day basis. It tips over when it starts doing harm to you in other aspects, including your physical health and so on. And that's tipping over towards the side of mental illness. So if you increase mental health, if you promote mental health, you reduce the risk of mental illness. If you get to a place where you, after promotion, you're preventing mental illness by doing things that we know, like, ensuring people are not drinking too much, people are not using substances that affect their brain, people are not being beaten up ovyo. That is preventing mental illness. Vaccination is preventing mental illness.
Yes.
Treatment of childhood illnesses is preventing mental illness. Taking care of pregnant women prevents mental illness. So having those things down, well done, is preventing mental illness on this other end. Now, when that fails, early diagnosis, so that you have these conversations and you can pick people early when they're changing, when their world is changing and they're no longer coping and they're having real difficulties. Picking it early and having a quick intervention prevents deterioration that will then affect their social and occupational functioning as mental illness.
Right.
We are seeing a lot of mental illness today because these other steps have failed or we haven't invested in them.
Right.
So we are focusing on the tip of the iceberg, which is the mental illness, and forgetting the base of that pyramid that has the
And just to add on that, sorry, in terms of the funding, so in 2011, the Commission on Human Rights released a report called Silence in the Minds, and in it, it was actually a response to a documentary that was aired by CNN called Locked and Forgotten, showcasing the decaying mental health infrastructure we have in Kenya. And what the Commission found was that Kenya is actually among 28% of countries that don't have funding specifically for mental health care. That was in 2011. The Mental Health Care Task Force report actually noted that this same issue is still there. And the current funding is at 0.01%. Exactly. So, when we talk about the law and it's great, but unfortunately, if there's no funding, how will people get counseling?
And just to your point,
30 seconds on to go to a break.
Okay. Last year during COVID, I actually did offer my counseling for free. And one thing that I realized is COVID actually was a breeding ground for addiction. That was number one, for addictions and trauma. Because already the disease itself was traumatic. People were losing their loved ones.
We didn't know what we didn't know.
Yes. And that already has been, he talked about, having something prolonged. And in counseling, we say, if you're having depression for 2 weeks, you need to check into a mental institution. Not for, medication, but just to have that one-on-one and see where are these feelings coming from. You understand? So when she talks about funding, part of the issue that we are currently having is a lot of people cannot even come out in the open to ask for help because they are ashamed that they cannot afford the services.
Wow, they cannot afford services. I want to take a short break, but I want to go out with Njoki Karu in yet another piece. Njoki is a music therapist, and she joins us again, as for the intro, with yet another piece. Don't go too far. This is With All Due Respect.
And maybe one day when I'm tall and wiser, I'll be jumping to the stars. I'll find all the questions to the answers barely remembered, and all the answers to the questions never asked. Oh, I hope, I hope, I hope, I hope, and maybe one day when I'm strong and louder, oh, I'll be heard across the seven skies, with bones like embers and dreams in golden
Get fresh, gotta get fresh.
Downy's new boom boom pow, Downy boom boom pow. Smells bayana uchafuzi na zibi na impure Downy. Protect nguo zangu na nukia niko safi. Lazima niwe fresh na Downy's boom boom pow. Boom boom pow, Downy's new boom boom pow. Smells zote nazi boom boom pow. Powerful freshness, Downy's boom boom pow.
Nani 15 bob too?
For a better tomorrow, don't forget to do the 1, 2, 3 with Colgate every night.
Win an iPhone 12 Pro with BetSafe. Place a bet of 50 bob or more on our sportsbook and stand a chance of winning only on BetSafe. Visit betsafe.co.ke. Hii ni season yako. betsafe.co.ke.
Madam, tunanukia poa kama asubuhi fiti.
Na nitanukia vizuri hivi kutoka asubuhi hadi jioni. With new Ariel Lavender, nitabaki fresh siku nzima. Msafi na mwenye harufu ya kuvutia. New Ariel Lavender, usafi fresh wa kukawia kwa muda mrefu.
Yani ni usiku na bado unanukia vizuri tu kama ngware.
Shopping guide. Shop during sales and promotions. Make sure you always have a shopping list. Glovo. You order, we deliver in minutes.
Get all your Naivas shopping delivered at home for only 60 shillings this September. Order Glovo, we deliver in minutes.
For years, others have told our stories and taken our narratives. That has led to misconceptions, half-truths, and outright lies. That ends now. It starts with the truth, our truth. A collection of our ideas, thoughts, and aspirations. The ones that propel us, enable us, and ultimately empower us. Find it all at nation.africa. Uninformed, unbiased, and comprehensive coverage of news and events, with in-depth investigative pieces as well as opinions from the best within and outside the continent. Nation Audio will also provide the best in creative audio experiences. Find fresh, innovative segment to stimulate your mind on Nation Puzzles. Stay up to date with the Nation newsletter. It's simple, affordable, and accessible to you with just one click from 150 shillings monthly. Subscribe now on nation.africa/subscribe and get the exclusive story. Nation. Empower Africa.
A place in your heart.
Hey, let me go! I can find my way out! The next time you attempt to get near any member of my family, you'll regret it.
Mom, we need to know if he is on our side or on Audrey's. And that's going to determine my next move.
How is my husband going to go back to normal if we don't tell him that what he remembers is all wrong?
His defense mechanism will cause him to resist all the information you're giving. As a consequence, his memory won't come back. A place in your heart.
Machiira Optiven at the Garden of Joy by Optiven. Deposit 995,000 Kenya shillings and get a free washing machine for your home. Call us today.
Inspiring possibilities.
All right, you're watching With All Due Respect. Mental wellness, mental health is our discussion tonight, and I have some feedback that should get us back into discussion. Washira Crispus says, Daktari, as you discuss decriminalizing mental illness, it is saddening to note that National Police Service who died by suicide are shunned and are not accorded the usual police honors, including the 21 gun salute. It happened in my village last week, and it breaks my heart. Vic Tembu says, I work in the health sector serving rural people and where mental health services are unavailable, making people suffer in silence, leading to complications in their otherwise mild conditions, which could have easily been treated and managed. It is time government put plans in place. Report, Lukoye Atwoli is spot on the long-term effects of adverse childhood experiences. Violence begets violence. We are a traumatized nation raising traumatized children, and we still want development. It is not working. Absolutely not working. But let's go to from the first comment of members of the National Police Service who either die by suicide. They're not accorded the honors as it is. What's up with that?
I like that comment because firstly, it frames one of the problems with how we talk about suicide. So we talk about committing suicide. Yes. I keep saying this. People don't commit suicide. People die by suicide, as he has correctly pointed out. People commit crimes. People commit adultery. People commit sins. People don't commit suicide. People die by suicide.
Right.
The language of committing suicide is colonial. When suicide was a crime, therefore you do suicide, you have committed a crime under a section of the law. It's no longer that way in the lexicon of mental health that you commit suicide, because you don't commit diabetes, you don't commit hypertension, and so on. So that's that aside. Right. Yes. And I commented on this and I said it shouldn't be like that, because every suicide should be treated as a preventable death. Because every suicide is preventable. If we pick up the science early, if we have services available, if our systems are set up to support people rather than to punish them, we can prevent suicide. So every suicide that happens in your organization, the police, media, in our hospitals and so on, every suicide should be treated as a preventable death. And what we do with preventable deaths, we investigate, we figure out what went wrong, and we learn lessons from it in order to prevent future deaths from that same cause. So every suicide should be treated as a preventable death, and all measures, like if somebody in this newsroom dropped dead, people wouldn't just say, oh man, somebody dropped dead, and then they forget about it. They'll say, why did this person drop dead? What happened? And then they would learn lessons from it. If there's a problem in the newsroom that is causing people to drop dead, it would be changed. Same as if in your organization somebody dies by suicide, we should investigate and say, what happened? Was there an illness that we missed? Was there some stressors that were placed on this person that drove them to suicide?
Absolutely.
How do we change that? Yeah. So we shouldn't, like the police, an officer who dies by suicide is a person who has passed a message, a strong message, and should be treated as such. It's not a loser. It's not somebody we should hide. It's not somebody we should forget about. It's somebody who's going to help the police force to change how they handle the people who serve this country in preventing crime.
Right. Yeah. Venus, the question on just I think it was Vic Tembu who talked about how she works in an area where, the rural areas and mental health is non-existent, does not exist. We are a traumatized nation, as we spoke about our politics and everything that around us just, make things almost impossible for you just to go by. We're not unique in that sense. As someone who deals with these cases every day, especially from, the poor neighborhoods and that sort of thing, what are the sort of like the ways on how people who are, economically challenged as well, if I could use that word, can access medication, can access, you and other, sort of facilities to help them just be well?
Okay. I think from my experience, let me talk about a slum that is just close to where I live. And, currently I do a lot of my sessions via Zoom. E-therapy has proved to work well. But unfortunately, for those struggling economically, it's very difficult for them to have bundles and, so you have to have ideally physical, therapy rooms set up. And that's where the challenge, comes in. And that's where we need the government to at least, create those facilities. Because any psychologist at the level of diploma can be able to tackle, basic, cases. Yeah. So without the structures in place, it's very hard for anyone to be able to access this help. All right. So we have, of course, the social workers who once in a while will go knock door to door. But I personally feel that if there's anything the government can do is to make this accessible by setting up offices and even deploying, you know, people who are willing, you know, to go out there. There are people, we have missionaries who go to preach the gospel. I believe we also have, you know, people who can really do this, you know, counselors who are willing to just sacrifice all and go into those spaces. Yeah, so I personally feel nothing can be done until offices are set up.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's expensive, to be honest. You know, it's expensive. I've been accessing professional help. It should not be, you know, a matter of goodwill. It should be, you know, yes, paid for it, either by the government, by the system, but it's expensive. It doesn't cost nothing, for sure.
It's very expensive. And even if you have health insurance, you are limited in how many sessions of therapy you can have. And so one wonders, how many therapy sessions should I go for to actually feel better? Because once you attend one for X amount of shillings, you feel like it's so expensive in your pockets, you will try and
manage yourself.
Soak as much knowledge as you can from your counselor or your therapist in that 1 hour that's allocated to you. And unfortunately, the same effort is not, you know, when we talk about our physical health and when we talk about, you know, physiotherapists, the amount of effort and the fact that it's so much more affordable to be able to actually get services to improve your physical health is completely different from therapy. I would love to see the government actually going back to the budget, allocating. Now, one of the things that the task force also recommended was that the mental health bill should also have a mental health fund. And another thing also is that there should be tax incentives. So for people who run mental health organizations, so, you know, they should get a tax relief. For families and caregivers who are raising children with psychosocial disabilities, they should also get some support from the government because it's expensive. It's expensive. You're going to work, you have to have somebody taking care of your child. And when we look at communities in remote places that actually hide their children, what I'm coming to understand is that they actually can't afford to leave their children unattended because they worry that they'll disappear, they worry that people will take advantage of them. And so it's very important to actually just support people from the community level. As Venus has correctly said, if just a diploma with a diploma you can be able to give counseling services, then let's actually, you know, devolve all those services to community health workers. In the same way we were having, as going back to the commercial corona poster, what kind of services are available in your community? What kind of services are available in your county? And by, you know, re-emphasizing on those messages, then people will always know that, oh, if I'm feeling a certain type of way, I know I can call this number. I think ABSA Kenya had a USSD that they had at the beginning of the pandemic, where if you dial a certain number, then you actually get connected to a counselor, and it was free.
as well.
And Safaricom. So, you know, we need to highlight all those conversations and all those initiatives.
And just to add on to your point, sorry, and just, you know, I like the issue of posters, because if we are so big about commercial corona, why aren't we saying commercial, you know, ugonjwa wa akili, you know? Because it's about visual impact. A lot of us are unable also to just, you know, reach out for help because we feel maybe it's just our own problem. Yet we don't know if most people are going through this. So I feel that, you know, away from all these things, we also need to really empower people by putting out posters. And I like the conversation we had with Daktari before we came back on air, and, you know, just having billboards, you know, that preach mental wellness. Yeah,
Prof, I want to bring this question, I mean, how to normalize things. And one of the things that I'm reminded of is at the height of HIV and AIDS, you know, pandemic, if you can call it that, one of the things that was key to make it relatable was this messaging of 2 out of every 5 people, you know, could be HIV positive. So it became not a thing of those people, it became a thing of me, you, brother, sister, you could see it. So how can we visualize mental health?
So I'm going to address that, but I'm going to say that to be fair to the government, right? After the task force report was released and handed over last year, a lot has been done. Not enough, and a long time might elapse before we actually see enough being done. So last year, the government declared Mathare a semi-autonomous government agency, and this year it should get a budget for Mathare, which will be probably 10 times what Mathare has been getting in the past to improve service. And if you go to Mathare today, you'll notice changes in the infrastructure based around patient comfort, how patients are taken care of. Another thing is that, so there is a process of creating a network of facilities across the country that are linked to this Mathare, so that Mathare is not a primary port of call for most people. And a few other things, including this mental health amendment bill, fast tracking. It was part of the task force report, and government came fully in support. And a reason for this is, number one, the president himself declared that no, this is a problem that's going to become my priority.
Right.
And the current minister, Cabinet Secretary Kagwe, has also said this is my priority. And his teams are working around the clock to make sure that this is done. So I think it's fair for us to mention this. And secondly, to mention that by law, all those county hospitals, all those public hospitals are mental hospitals, and they're expected to provide mental health services. They should budget for them, and they should provide those services. Moving on to the conversation around normalizing conversations around mental health. I fully agree that a huge component of the issues that prevent proper conversations, prevent intervention, prevent people from seeking help when they need help, the big one is stigma. And stigma, like in HIV, because HIV started as a disease of homosexuals, and people said, hey, we are not like this, and so on. So it was very stigmatized, and then it became a disease of people who are promiscuous. Then we said, no, anybody can get HIV.
Yeah.
All right? Mental health, even more so, that anybody can get mental ill health. Yeah. All right? And everybody can improve their mental health through simple measures that we have talked about. So having conversations around how do we make our mental health better? How do we prevent mental illness? How do we, get people help quickly when they need help? These conversations can be had. We can use statistics, and those statistics are glaring. We haven't done a national survey in Kenya, but we have statistics from smaller studies that tell you up to half of people who walk into a general hospital for any reason are suffering from depression. Depression, not mental illness in general, but depression. And out of those, only maybe 4 or 5% have been diagnosed with depression and are on any kind of treatment, and the majority of them are on inadequate treatment. So think about it that way. And depression is one of the mental illnesses. There are other mental illnesses where people actually don't even know they have a mental illness. They are treated like, people who should just be, like they said, hidden away, locked up, forgotten, and so on. So conversations around saying, for instance, 1 out of every 100 Kenyans will have a condition called schizophrenia. Think about that. This is a severe mental illness that interferes with one's ability to achieve their full potential.
Yeah.
Untreated, it is fatal, just like cancer, just like diabetes, just like hypertension. 1% of Kenyans. 15 to 25% of Kenyans will have a depressive episode in their lifetime. That is up to 1 out of 4 Kenyans.
Wow.
About 40% of Kenyans will experience an anxiety, serious enough to be clinically diagnosed, an anxiety attack. 40%. A huge proportion of our children are being born with conditions that affect their full mental function. Very few of them are being diagnosed, very few of them are being taken for treatment. So it is a huge problem, and we have to start conversations around saying, we can be sitting here and one of us would be suffering from a mental illness,
right,
and they haven't received care. And that should be a normal conversation. And somebody should be able to ask, where can I go? I didn't sleep very well last night. I'm having a bit of difficulty understanding, concentrating, and so on. Somebody says, no, so-and-so next door can help you. So this should be a normal conversation. Workplaces such as this media house must have mental health services for their workers.
Absolutely.
Journalists are exposed to all sorts of things that all of us are exposed to.
I'm grateful my boss is thank you for advocating for us.
So he needs to do something about that.
Yes.
The hospitals, universities, schools must have access to mental health services. Our children should be schooling in environments that have access to mental health services.
Absolutely.
Because some of them whom we call stupid, some of those we call underachievers, are extremely intelligent. It's just that they are weighed down by mental ill health. And if this is addressed, we see them just thriving and just going out there and becoming extremely productive.
I want to talk, Prof, about as you start winding up, the less of 100 psychiatrists, people like you, and so you're a very busy man. If all of us in this country were to book an appointment to see you, it would be impossible.
Absolutely.
How
do you address?
Yes, how do we address that? How can we start, seeking help and seeing, people like you?
So I'll start on the other end, and I'll say a majority of people with mental health challenges or distress and so on will not need to see a psychiatrist. The vast majority will need somebody, a shoulder to do, just somebody to listen to their challenges, and they'll feel better.
Right.
The vast majority. And then Others will do well with a counselor. Others will do well with a clinical psychologist. And then those with severe mental illness that requires therapy, that requires medication, that might require admission in a hospital, will then require the input of a psychiatrist. And even then, we have trained a vast majority of our doctors to deal with mental health emergencies. So that should be something that should be happening in our society, and people should have access to these people. We have very few psychiatrists in Kenya for a simple reason, that we haven't invested in training of mental health workers. We have not invested in it. We have only 2 medical schools right now that train psychiatrists. That is University of Nairobi and Moi University.
Yeah.
And so we are training very few. And when it's not a priority in many places. Maybe it's going to become a priority now that the president has said this is a priority. We have about 120 psychiatrists, give or take. Even if all of them focus on treating only one mental illness, most of those patients will not get access to care. So we have to increase those numbers. We have to increase the numbers of clinical psychologists. We have to increase the numbers of psychiatric social workers. We have to increase the numbers of counselors. And not just increase them, but employ them and deploy them. Because in this country, sometimes we increase numbers and then we say we can't employ you.
Yeah.
And the problem is still there. So we have to have a plan that increases the numbers and also deploys them into the community where the need is greatest. But just remember, at the end of the day, our society can transform itself into a mental health friendly society where I wouldn't need to even see a counselor. If I'm having a bit of distress, I can go to my neighbor or a friend and I sit there and my friend says, I understand, I hear you.
And that's enough.
And that's good enough for many people.
Yeah.
Oh, what I'm going through is normal. Yes, what you're going through is normal.
Mm.
It's like, oh, thank goodness. And they can go on with the rest of their life.
Right. Loise, what's important for you as we start closing down?
The most important thing for me is for the government to prioritize allocating enough funding to actually supplement a lot of these facilities, and also encourage a lot of students to actually go into mental health treatment. Because if we see that if they see that mental health care is not something that's prioritized, or it's not a career that can be sustainable and that can actually be able to take them far, then you'll find a lot of people actually pulling back from this. So I would encourage, I would love to see the government allocating good funding for mental health care facilities. I would also love to see a lot of mental health care facilities actually raising awareness through communication, through visuals, working with content creators like myself and TZ Talks to be able to actually just showcase where you can get the information from. Have more companies and more employers enabling their employees to seek mental health care support, because how are you going to be productive in the office if you're stressed, for example?
Right.
Every decision that you make pertains to your mental well-being. And so for me, those would be my key important priorities.
So this is important. And for you, I just want, to look at that camera. How can people access you? What's important for you?
You can access me through my number, because I do my online, I do sessions online. So I'll give out my number, 0722 816167. I'll repeat again, 0722 816167. I go by the name The Mind Spa on Facebook, all the social media handles. And I think what is important for me, just to back up on what the two panelists have said, is empowering our children and our teenagers. They're the future leaders. I have worked in spaces where you're dealing with a 5-year-old who has been given into prostitution, and they still go to school. This just brings tears to my eyes, because this child has no voice. But thinking about it, what if the government would put the structures and the systems in place such that every school must have counselors, whether in rural areas, whether in town? Let counseling be a priority. The way we want to make this education system very flexible, let us also make mental health a priority to our children. Some of our teenagers, some of our children are being mentored and parented by parents who are ill.
Right.
They keep on fighting broken relationships, you see. So children are growing up seeing their parents fight, sleeping in different rooms, threatening each other. And this is what they pick. And part of the things that make us or shape us as individuals is the conditioning in our environment. So it is, if we want a great future, if we want a great society, I feel we need to go back to the basic level and invest in our children and our teenagers.
Thank you very much, Venus Kyengo, Professor Lukoye Atwoli, and Loise Machiira. You've all done very well. From the producers, they say we should have this discussion again with the same panel. We will have it again. Yes. Thank you very much. I want to finish with Njoki Karu, with taking us and, you know, dropping one of the final songs. And for everyone who's commented tonight, thank you very much. In this program, we'll prioritize mental health and mental wellness. My name is James Smart.
Binadamu ni mavumbi, mavumbini atarudi. 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 Na tukifika huko tutaimba haleluya. Makao ya raha starehe iko huko mbinguni. Na tukifika huko tutaimba haleluya. Makao ya raha starehe iko huko mbinguni. Mwili wake hunyauka kama ua la bondeni. 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 Na tukifika huko tutaimba haleluya. Makao ya raha na starehe iko huko mbinguni. Na tukifika huko tutaimba haleluya. Makao ya raha na starehe iko huko mbinguni. Na tukifika huko tutaimba haleluya. Makao ya raha na starehe iko huko mbinguni. Na tukifika huko tutaimba haleluya. Makao ya raha na starehe iko huko mbinguni. Na tukifika huko tutaimba haleluya. Makao ya raha na starehe iko huko mbinguni. Na tukifika huko tutaimba haleluya. Makao ya raha na starehe iko